Welcome, everybody. Welcome. This is our Rise Up and Carve discussion and talk by Julian Jones, Little Bear Sloyd on Instagram, about the Welsh Cawl spoon, its history and its design. Welcome to those of you just joining us. I am recording this session, so just in case anybody objects to being on camera and being recorded, you might want to either shut your camera off or block your lens. This will be posted up onto our YouTube channel when we're done. What I want to do is to just basically ask everybody to please keep yourselves muted unless you have a question that you want to ask Julian. And then if you do want to ask a question, you can go ahead and unmute yourself, ask your question, and then I would ask you to remute yourself at that point. Because of the way the recording works on Zoom, anytime there's noise coming from your microphone or or if you're talking, the camera and the recording is going to shift focus to you. And we want to try and keep it on Julian while he's giving his responses, especially, or during his presentation. So I guess that's pretty much it. Again, I welcome everybody, and we're really looking forward to this. Julian has done quite a bit of research as part of his history degree, or work on towards his history degrees. And so he knows quite a bit about Welsh Cawl spoons, and we're really looking forward to hearing and seeing what he has to share with us. So thank you, Julian. Really appreciate it. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you and mute myself.
Thanks, Chuck. Hi, everyone. Thanks again, everyone, for coming along. It's great to see such a good turnout for these little, very specific, very niche talks and explanations that I've been doing. So I appreciate that. I'm gonna share my screen because I've made a little PowerPoint so that you can see some of the photographs and documents and stuff that I wanted to talk about. So just let me know in the chat if anything isn't working the way that I probably intended. There we go. And as Chuck just mentioned earlier, we do not have the webinar version of Zoom. So there's a few features that I'm missing, but hopefully we can get by with this. Now, if I can go to my presenter view. Okay, could you please just let me know if you can see my slideshow in the full screen?
Visible, but not full screen.
Not full screen.
Yeah, it's not full screen.
So are you looking at my presenter view right now?
Correct.
Okay, that's all right. I can change what I'm sharing. Where's the yeah. All right, well, I might, because, okay, this time, what do you see?
Now we see your main screen. I see it as
notes view now.
And then I see your notes to the side, yeah.
All right. See, my question is, how do I still have the notes for myself, yet view the full screen slides?
It's a good question. I don't know if there's a way for you to do that.
You have two screens?
No, I just have the one screen right now.
Then I don't think there's a way for you to do it.
All right, because when you screen share, you should be able to select what the participants will see.
Yeah,
in theory,
I'm not sure. You know what though? It's I don't know, on my computer anyway. Like the other problem I have is it's really big on mine, so I've got to scroll around to see everything.
Yeah. Okay. What are you looking at now?
Well, now we see the presentation.
Okay,
yeah. Now we just see the presentation. Okay, there we go.
You still see just the presentation?
No, we also see your notes, but again, I can pull off to the side for me personally anyway. I don't know about anybody else.
Okay, well, we're just going to have to look at the version that has my notes because otherwise I won't be able to see my notes.
Yep, that's fine.
All right. If the pictures are important, then I will put them up in full screen for you to see. Okay.
Julian, can I ask one other question?
Yes.
Are you willing to share this presentation with us? Is there a way that we can make it available, or is that something you'd prefer not to do?
No,
Just so I can know if I want to take notes or not.
I'm very happy to share these slides after the fact.
Awesome. Okay, cool.
Just as a note before, I've done my best to any sources that I've used, I've given in so that you can go and read them themselves if you want. Everything is footnoted, not in a like rigorous academic way, but in a close enough way that you can find out where I got that information from. So I wanted to start by talking about like what exactly was my interest in Cawl spoons from an academic perspective. Like why would I choose that for my research project? And the reason that I did that is because Cawl spoons were an example of this sort of vernacular craft or peasant craft that I thought was curiously understudied when it comes to folklore studies in Wales and more generally around the world. Like plenty of people have written very good scholarship on, for example, Welsh furniture, Welsh stick chairs, other like domestic items that have come from Wales in the same time period. But I think because of the sort of ubiquity and sort of simple nature of wooden spoons, that they kind of slip under the radar as a really interesting object in material culture. So material culture is a concept that I'll talk about a little bit. And basically material culture is what historians refer to when they're talking about physical items that exist from the past. So we're not just talking about words on a page. When we're talking about material culture, we're talking about like actual items that existed that people used. And in terms of words on the page, when you talk about material culture, you might be talking about the actual paper, the actual book, the actual experience of reading the book. So material culture is this idea of historical sources that aren't just textual, but are sort of extra textual. They have an experiential aspect to them. You can experience them. Like an item, for example, a wooden spoon, is a unique historical source because it exists from the past, but yet you can re-experience that object just as someone in the past may have done. It's not like you don't have to have the entire context in order to appreciate sort of the entirety of the object, as you might when you're looking at a document type source. Anyway, so that's some of the theoretical underpinning of what I was interested in here. So my title screen here is an illustration from a book called Welsh Country Crafts by Iorwerth Pete, and he was a museum curator at the Welsh National Museum at St Fagans for a very long time, and he actually was one of the people who created that museum. So really interested in folk craft and in sort of documenting the vernacular crafts of the countryside so that they could survive into the future. And that's a bit of a common theme in some of these 20th century academics who were looking back at traditional crafts, because they had this very strong sense, even in the 20th century, that these crafts were going to disappear and that they should document them. Like I've said, Cawl spoons are curious because there's very little written record of them in as far as I could tell. But an important note for that is that I do not speak Welsh and I cannot read Welsh. So there may be plenty of Welsh language sources out there talking about Cawl spoons, but they're not helpful to me until I can find someone to sort of select them and translate them for me, which is not a realistic prospect at the moment. So that's just something to consider in terms of when I talk about there being no information. There's no information in English. So there's comparably few written accounts, but what there are a lot of are antique spoons. So an idea of doing a Welsh Cawl spoon history project is sort of tackling the question of how do we write history without looking at any written sources? Like, how do you write history just by looking at things that survived from the past? So that was what I was trying to answer when I started doing this research. And that's not really a question that I'll be able to answer in this talk, but I'm just going to go over what evidence exists and what I think about it. And then at the end, we're going to look through some slides, and I think it'd be fun for us to discuss it together. So what I did find when I went looking is I found a bunch of photographs and accounts from the early 20th century, as I said, from these folklore and folkcraft scholars who were trying to document things in Wales before they died out forever. And that was the feeling that they had about it, that these crafts were going to go extinct. So the premise behind that is that what I'm really interested in is the 19th century. So why am I looking at these 1930s photographs? First of all, there are no photographs from the 19th century. And second of all, we can assume that these photographs that are coming from the 1930s are pretty true to the continuity of tradition that existed earlier. Like they represent the same craft, the same things that had already been going on for hundreds of years at that point, and they were documenting sort of the end of it, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't accurate to what sort of came before, because one of the things about Welsh traditional crafts is that there is a lot of continuity and not too much change. Like, for example, Welsh stick chairs and Welsh Cawl spoons stayed the same for a very long time without the sort of fashions and styles and changes that occurred elsewhere in the world in terms of furniture and homewares and sort of domestic life and stuff like that. So before you can understand Cawl spoons, you need to understand Cawl. And I think the only point that needs making is that Wales in the 19th and 18th centuries is a pretty miserable place for anyone who was in sort of the masses, so to speak. So like people's diets were pretty grim. There were periodical famines. There was economic collapse. There was a mass migration from the country into the city. And a bunch of different factors that all combined to the fact that it was pretty miserable to be a poor person in Wales in the 19th century. So having considered that, you can get some of these historical accounts of what exactly Welsh people ate. And one of these for me is quite comical because this one, I'll just read this point on my slide. Walter Davies, as he roamed Cardiganshire in 1810, gathering information for his report for the Board of Agriculture, collected recipes. These included for, I can't pronounce that, sorry, but Cawl Cowsy Tlawd, the cheese broth of the poor, which consisted of a little bread, hot water, and salt. The name was a ghastly joke because there was no cheese. So you can see the very, very basic of what would be considered cawl, which, as I said before, is just a word for broth. And the poor would be eating some very watery, not so nutritious meals. And that is the sort of tradition that these spoons came out of. It's not, they're not a high class item. They're not like an art object. They're a very utilitarian functional spoon for a not so glamorous meal. So here are some interesting illustrations that I'm going to show you of what a Welsh country kitchen may have looked like in the 19th century. So the Welsh country kitchen was called the Segin or something like that. And what that meant was it wasn't just a kitchen, it was also a family room, it was also a hearth, it was also a living area. So this room would be sort of in the middle of the house, the farmhouse, and it would sort of be the heart of the house. So you would have your open hearth, you would have a very rudimentary kitchen, and maybe a stone oven if you had a nice house. And what's interesting about this is if you look carefully at this image, you can see the cawl spoons on a rack in the top left. And this is a 1930s illustration from someone who went traveling around the countryside documenting these original cottages. So these cottages would have been this way for generations, and this is what they looked like this is just before everything changed. Like this is like before these kinds of country cottages ceased to exist. And I've just got a recommendation here for an article by someone who goes in depth about the Welsh country kitchen and what it meant for people at that time, and what they did in there, and the design of the houses and all that sort of stuff that's tangentially related to spoons. Here's another one of these images. It's apart from the general aesthetic of the kitchen, what we're paying attention to is the cow spoon rack right up there on the wall. So can everyone see those very, very, what's the word? They're very recognizable, instantly recognizable that those are cow spoons. And what the common thread that you'll find in these images is that Welsh people in the 19th century would keep their cow spoons in a rack on the wall for daily use. And it would sort of be within arm's reach of the kitchen or the living areas, and in a very sort of practical way, because everyone who has a lot of wooden spoons knows that a spoon rack is the most efficient way to keep all of your spoons, not only to keep them dry and free of mold from drying after washing them, but also just to be able to look at them. You know, like if you've got a bunch of nice spoons, you want to have them up on the wall where you can see them. And that is the attitude that people had. If you look at some of these images of the old houses, they've got all of their possessions up on the wall so that you can see them. And I've just on the slide, I've got some related information for to show that in the Welsh countryside in this time, that everyone had to have a broad, self-sufficient range of skills. Because the world was so small when you're a Welsh farmer, there's nowhere for you to go. You and your neighbors have to provide everything that you could need. So the Welsh smallholder or farmer tended to be a very multi-skilled person who could fix a wagon wheel, who could carve spoons, who could make furniture, who could do a variety of woodworking tasks, just as a part of their general life skills, not so much as a specific trade that they might embark on. Here's an interesting one. This is again from the early 20th century. And this is a market stall of the Rees Turner's stand. And if you look at the top, you can see all the cow spoons hanging up there on top. And you can see everything else that they were making. So this is an old photograph from a market day, and markets were really important in Wales at this time, because obviously you could intuit that there were no department stores, and if they were, that they might be too expensive for people of few means. So people would go to a regular market to get their produce, to get their things that they need. And people from the countryside, like these wood turners, would come into the city and would bring a wagon load of all of their treen that they had been making, and they would go across several different counties, sort of traveling maybe up to 100 kilometers around to sell their wares that they had made. So I guess the point that I wanted to make is that these were not, like I said earlier, they're not art objects, they're products. They did this not out of some romantic idea about spoon carving, but because they were skilled turners and woodworkers, and they would make pretty much everything that they could in order to have the widest range of things available to sell at the market. And so for these guys, the Rees family, that, as you can see, they've got plates, they've got bowls, they've got stools. They would also sell tool handles. They've got butter prints, which in the domestic dairy industry, those would be used to stamp your brand onto your butter. There's other dairy implements. There's big ladles. There's these dinner trays, and there's a few other things that I don't quite recognize, but I think that's about it in terms of the things that they made. So what I just did a market today for my spoons, and I'm just imagining how multi-skilled of a craftsman I would have to be to bring this range of things to every single market that I go to. I just think that's it shows the range of skills that they had. Here is another really interesting image. This one is a very rare photograph because it is of a spoon carver in his workshop making Cawl spoons. And you almost never find these kinds of photographs because the only people who were interested in photographing this stuff were these folk life researchers. And photographs were still new and interesting at this time, new and interesting enough that if you were going to take a photograph of something, it was going to be something notable. And you're unlikely to go to your local woodworker and take a photograph of him working because photographs are expensive, and you're probably more likely to go and take a photograph of the local church. You know, like it's not, it just wasn't a photo subject that they would have thought of, and unless they were in this mood to document craft in this way. So I just love this photo because there's some really curious things about it. So he's got his hatchet, he's sitting down at his block. You can see he's got a stool that's got his pile of axed out spoons. And what would be going on here is he, John Davies, he would be the patriarch in this situation. And he would come into work in the morning and he would axe out a pile of spoons for his apprentice to finish throughout the day. So that's what's going on here. And they did the same things as us. They would axe out and roughly carve a pile of spoons, and then those spoons would just accumulate until it was time for the market, and then they would finish them all to bring to the market. So they had the exact same green woodworking process that we now understand, where you work with fresh timber, you axe it out while it's green, you do the rough work, and then you let it dry before you finish the work. And I think I may have skipped past it in my notes, so I'll go back and look at my notes to make sure I didn't miss anything. But these guys could make a spoon from start to finish in 15 minutes. They were like, there was absolutely no time wasted. So just like trying to pick out some things in this photo, you can see what he's got here is a transitional style of continuous motion lathe, where it is a continuous turning lathe, but there's no motor. The motor is his poor apprentice who has to turn the hand crank on that massive flywheel that you can see in the front of the image. So it's a very interesting sort of human-powered interim between the spring pole lathe and the electric lathe. And like I said, these guys were pragmatists. So when the electric lathe came around, none of them would use their pole lathe anymore because it wasn't as quick. They could make more things more efficiently with the electric lathe. So unless they were a country craftsman who didn't have electricity in their workshop, they were very quick to adopt the new technology. Here's another angle of that workshop. But in this one, you can see the spring pole lathe instead of that other one that we saw. I don't know too much about pole lathe turning, so I'd love to hear from someone who does. But that spring pole lathe is a dead ringer for ones that everyone is still using. So this photo was taken in the very early 20th century, and you can see that this is a lathe for turning bowls. It's not a spindle lathe; it's a bowl turning lathe, and it looks to have been sort of constructed in a like a workbench style with the four legs and the moving head centers. And you can see that he's currently turning a big bowl, and there's another one on the bench that he's just finished turning. And the spring pole actually is coming from the corner of the workshop up over on top of the lathe. So there's no elastic. He's just got a big stick in his workshop. Here is a photo showing how they made the ladles. This is from Ceredigion. And these, in case you're wondering where the Tukakam and this characteristic Welsh tools came from, well, this is it. So you can, if you look carefully at the rightmost picture here, you can see he's using a homemade Tukakam with a long handle that's tucked into his elbow, which is the technique that if you pick one up, you'll naturally come to figure out that that's the effective way to use them when you've got the nice long handle on there. So you'd use the bent adze to hollow out the bowl of these ladles, and then the Tukakam, which is what is described in some of the textual descriptions of how these guys worked, which I'm going to go back and look for those on my presenter view. Here we go. So I've just got a few quotes here that I will read out, but so turning was a widespread skill amongst woodworkers, but some made a specialty of the craft and used pole lathes and simple hook tools to produce bowls, platters, and butter prints in sycamore and applewood, as well as tool handles and stools in ash. The same craftsmen made related dairy and domestic objects such as spoons and planer stools by shaping split sections of timber, and they were known as Seri Gwyn, literally white carpenters, because they worked in plain wood, sycamore and ash. They favoured sycamore, which was abundant in the West and particularly suitable as it imparted no taste to food. Long-established families such as the Reesters and Davieses, both located in well-wooded tributaries, were among a number who continued these methods into the 20th century. So these photos I showed you, they were the last people who were still doing this. It was at a time, it was very widespread, and these guys were sort of the hangers-on. And they became quite famous in their day for being like the last turner or the last carver, or sort of this romantic idea of the last craftsman of a dying art form kind of thing. So they would walk quite far around to sell these things. And sort of the death of the industry was, of course, industrial mass-produced things coming in from the UK. Do I have anything to say about this one? I don't think so. Yeah, and just like every account that I've read agrees that this was purely utilitarian, which is, it's interesting to me because when you look back at these antiques, you can see how beautiful they are. So it's kind of hard to believe that the guys who made them were 100% concerned with function and efficiency and nothing else. But all of the accounts that they have to talk about that agree that these wood turners did not care about making something beautiful. They wanted to make something functional very quickly. And I've got, you can look at this if you want when I upload the slides later, but what I've got here is a textual description of how spoon carving was traditionally done. I'm going to skim through it. It's very similar to some of the way that we all carve spoons, but there's a few interesting differences. So they would go out into the woods in the wintertime because they believed that that was the best time to fell timber. And they would use axes to fell trees and buck them with a crosscut saw, and they would strap that log to their draft horses who would carry it back into town. And it says here, with the aid of a small cleaving iron and hammer, and I'm interpreting that means a froe, and the author of this passage just didn't know that was what a froe was. So with a cleaving iron and hammer, they split the wood in two, sitting on a three-legged stool. I don't know if you can see my camera, but I'm sitting on a three-legged stool. Anyway, sitting on a three-legged stool, the craftsman roughs out the work with a short-handled axe to the approximate shape of the spoon. With a few deft strokes, the handle and the shoulders of the spoon, as well as the rough outline of the bowl, are cut. After roughing out with the axe, the half-finished spoon now needs hollowing, and this is done with a peculiar shaped knife known as a tukakam. This tool, which has a handle some 18 inches in length, very long, that's a long handle. 18 inches, that's even longer than mine. I don't know if you can see my screen, but if you want to look at my camera for a moment, we'll do a little size comparison. I'll get my ruler out. Okay, so 18 inches. This is my Tuka cam, made in Wales by Nick Westerman. I'm sure a lot of you have these. So these tools are still being made I think they're a lot better now than they used to be, because they used to be a user-made tool. There were no specialty blacksmiths making spoon carving tools in the past. The craftsmen would make their own. Anyway, I was just interested in the handle length, because this discussion, this textual source here says that the handle was 18 inches long. I've got what I consider to be a long Tuka handle, and mine is only 16 inches. So 18 inches is an extra like this much on the end of that handle. So they really valued that long handle for getting powerful cuts. So there you go. If you're ever wondering what the historically correct length of handle is for a Tuka cam, 18 inches. But no, I'm being facetious, because of course the correct length of handle depends on your body geometry. So where were we up to? And like I said, the curved blade was usually made by the craftsman himself from an old file or chisel. It's kept extremely sharp, and to use it, the handle is tucked under the user's right arm and tightly against his body, while the blade is grasped firmly in the right hand, with the tip of the handle acting as a fulcrum. Considerable power is applied to the blade, and with a few short sweeping moments, the core of the spoon is removed cleanly. The convex side of the spoon and the handle has to be smoothed next, and this is done with an ordinary small-sized spoke shave. Now, that was new to me when I first read this. I would have assumed that they'd just use their carving knife for that, but no, what they would do is the reason that a lot of these Cawl spoons have square handles is so that they could put them in the vise and do some of these steps a little bit quicker. So they'd put the handle in the vise, and they would use a spoke shave. So they probably would have used a wooden-bodied spoke shave, the traditional kind. But at the time that this was written, these metal body spoke shaves did exist. So it's not infeasible to think that they may have had one of these. Or on Chuck's screen, you can see he's showing one of the old-fashioned type. So that would have been used to round off the back of the bowl. And if you've ever used one of those, it's quick and efficient. And if you can get two hands on it, then it's probably easier than using a knife. So this is held in the palm of the hand and is used to smooth away all unevenness. Finally, the tip of the handle, the edges of the spoon, and the shoulders are cleaned and finished with a short-bladed knife. The whole process of making a broth spoon takes little more than 15 minutes from when the sycamore log is cleft to the final stage when the spoon is cleaned with the knife. So I assume that means 15 minutes from log to finished spoon carved green. And I don't believe that they would have gone over again to carve them once they were dry, unless when they had roughed out the spoon, it wasn't quite done, and then they would come back to it later. So there's sort of conflicting accounts on whether they finished the entire spoon while it's green or whether they would set it aside and finish it again. And it could just be due to the difference in perceptiveness of whoever wrote these accounts when they visited the spoon carver's workshop. So you can read these, but you've got to interpret them as well. You can say, well, who was writing this account of the spoon carver's workshop? It probably wasn't someone who knew very much about spoon carving. It was just a keen observer. So you can sort of extrapolate a few things with your knowledge of spoon carving and the account from the past to sort of put together a picture of how they may have done it. So I'm going to go back to the big slides. All right. And this is just an illustration of my point earlier that people sort of took pride in their possessions and wanted them up on the wall where they could be seen by visitors and themselves and anyone else. So this is a sort of typical Welsh country scene. You've got your English china on the wall, transfer printed china, and then you've got some dairy implements hanging up next to it. So the butter pat, these roller type things, I believe on hanging up in the middle there is a traditional style of potato masher. If anyone's seen those in Barnes' book, that is one of the old ones. And then there's a large ladle hanging up there, some tongs for the fireplace, a kettle, an iron, some cowl bowls, some wooden bowls up there on the top shelf, pole lathe turned bowls. So they would have used the wooden bowls to have with their wooden spoons for their cowl. So that, like, they wouldn't have used a porcelain bowl for that. They were very, this generation of people were very attached to using the pole lathe turned bowls and the wooden spoons for this particular meal, which I just think is very curious. And I'm sure you've all read the quote on the page now, but it's just saying that that wooden spoons were a very characteristic item. That spoon carving was a popular hobby among people, even among people who would carve for leisure rather than carving for a living, like the people that we were looking at in the previous slides. And I don't know if you've ever heard of the Eisteddfod, which is a tradition that comes from Wales, where it's a sort of a competition where you can go and see who can sing the best or see who can do this or that the best. And there's historical records of Eisteddfods where there have been spoon carving competitions and other things, like who can make the best furniture, who can carve the finest love spoon, stuff like that. So they took a lot of pride in it from a hobby perspective. And that is an interesting parallel to the more commercial aspect of these carvers who are doing it for a living. Here's another one. This one is a cowl spoon rack that has been built into a dairy dresser. Isn't that great? It's just a really practical, functional piece of furniture. They've got all of their mugs hanging up off the top. They've got their dairy items on the shelf. They've got their buckets underneath, and on the front, they've drilled a bunch of holes to put their spoons in. And I just think it's really interesting that spoons have such a pride of place in country life here, and not just any spoons, but wooden cowl spoons specifically. That someone would take a nice piece of furniture and drill a bunch of holes in it so that they could put their cowl spoons there. I just think that's great. And this is an antique piece of furniture. Like, this is hundreds of years old. It shows you how long this tradition goes on for. So now I'm going to start the sort of round table section of this talk. So if you no longer feel like you have to be on mute, because I would like to have a bit of a group discussion about some of these. But before we do that, does anyone want to jump in with a question about anything that I've discussed so far?
I had one quick. Go ahead. Did somebody else want to say something?
Brad, we'll do you first.
Oh, I coughed. Sorry, but I do have a question. If you can go back to that last image of the dairy cabinet, I would suggest that used to be in a building with a dirt floor.
Yes, yeah.
You know, the things that I store out in my barn, the legs rot from the bottom up. And even if they mop that floor every day on a stone floor, that would have dried out and it probably wouldn't look like that.
Yeah, so I think what has happened here is that this is an old piece of farmhouse furniture that has been transplanted into a display area. And so sort of like your museum display or your living history exhibit is going to try and take care of the furniture, so that they're going to try and contextualize it and putting it in situ, but it probably originally, as you say, would have been in a much a working farm, you know, like this, like it was a working dairy farm. It wasn't for us to look at and go, oh, this is interesting. Chuck, did you have?
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, it's like if I got to imagine that the hobby aspect of carving spoons and people sitting around carving spoons wasn't that widespread. I mean, it was widespread, but it probably wasn't like the majority of the population. Otherwise, who were the commercial spoon carvers and woodworkers selling their wares to if everybody was carving their own spoons, you know?
Yeah, so that's a good question. It seems like I think what's going on here is when they talk about everyone carving their own spoons, they're sort of talking about a different time period than these guys that we've been discussing who would come to market for everyone. And the other thing is that carving your own spoons was a country pursuit, whereas these would come to the city to go to the markets to sell spoons to the city folk. You can sort of extrapolate from that country folk didn't need to go to the market to get their wooden spoons, because they would have known a bloke who made spoons.
Right.
There would have been a bloke in the village who was the guy who made spoons, which continues to be the case up until today. And I think for most of us, we are that person in the community who makes spoons.
Yep.
Anyone else have any questions about anything we talked about?
Could I just mention that there was a person that used to travel around in Wales. If you came back from war, and you'd lost a leg or something, or you were injured, you couldn't work, then quite often you'd make spoons and travel around as a spoon man, and they were often bought out of charity as well for this spoon man, particularly with Cawl, spoons. Obviously, that's what he would have been making.
I've also heard this, but I've been trying and I cannot find a source for it. I can't find anyone who's it's obviously well known that this was the case, but I can't find anyone who's written it down, and that's interesting. I would say a failing of trying to do research from another country without access to just go and talk to the old people, which I haven't been able to do. But if I was going to do this research project more genuinely, then I would be traveling to Wales and I'd be going around and trying to find old folk who still eat and get them to tell me about it. So yeah, I've also heard that, and I've heard that when the spoon man would come to the village, as you say, someone who for whatever reason couldn't work in the fields, couldn't work in the mines, you would chuck your spoons in the fire and buy new ones out of charity.
Yeah.
I think that's something that we modern day spoon carvers need to encourage amongst the population. I'm thinking now I want to dress as poorly as possible, go out into the streets of my local village and open up my trench coat with a spoon rack inside. Want to buy a spoon? No? Oh well.
Thanks for chipping in, Adrian. It's always great to hear a Welshman's perspective on all of this. If you didn't know, my granddad grew up on a dairy farm in Wales, in Carmarthenshire, but I've only been there once, so I don't have the same sort of experience as someone who was born and grew up in Wales. So I'm always looking for that information. So let's have a look at some spoons. So these are some Cawl spoons that I've saved from the Instagram pages of Welsh antiques dealers, which I think is the best source for looking at high quality images of Cawl spoons. Because antiques dealers want you to see how nice the spoon is so that you buy it. So they're always taking really nice photos. Whereas a lot of museum spoons are poorly photographed or not photographed at all. So if you can't go and look at them in person, it can be tricky to figure out what exactly they look like. So that's all to say that I wanted to show here that the two main styles of Cawl spoons that I could find that differ from each other, which you can see in these two different images. So on the left, we've got the, well, there's a bit of both on the left, but mostly on the left, we've got the sort of rat tail or round tail style of spoon with a bowl that has a pronounced lip above the level of the handle. And then on these other spoons, they're a bit more similar to the ones that I make, where they've got a flat or a curved handle on top and the handle sort of curves gracefully into the bowl of the spoon. And you can see one of those in the left image on the bottom left is one that has that characteristic Cawl spoon shape that I'm now trying to replicate, and on the ones on the right as well.
It strikes me that some of these, the rat tail sort of thing, although like they're somewhat similar actually to Barnes, what he referred to as his medieval spoon, like his fig shaped bowl and his octagonal handle, but they look very similar.
They do look similar, don't they? But these are both Cawl spoons, and it shows the variety of shapes that are within the style. How
deep would you guess these to be?
Well, just looking at them visually, I'd say they're a lot deeper than the ones I make. These all carry a good mouthful of broth. I tend to make them a bit more shallow now because that's what I like for my spoons. But you really can tweak the shape however you like. So you can see some of these are deeper, some of them are lighter, and these ones on the left all have this beautiful patina from being used and used and used and used and used. Whereas if you look at that ladle on the right, that one's actually been scrubbed, so it still has the pale sycamore color, even though it's very old. So you can find them in both states. You can find them with the original patina, or you can find them with that having been scrubbed off. Which to me seems like a bit of a trick, but it's what they used to do.
We'll do it. Sit with you for a bit.
Used to really scrub this.
Were you asking something, Fraser?
I think Fraser's forgotten to turn his mic off, but that's all right. We will we'll look at these ladles. So alongside the Cawl spoons, you've got the Cawl ladle.
No, saying.
Fraser, if you can hear me, can you mute yourself? I can't find him, otherwise I'd mute him.
I think you can do that.
Oh, there he is. I got him. I'll mute him. There we go.
Thank you. So these ones, the ladles, the Cawl ladles are almost as widespread as the spoons are, because it's no use having a pot of soup and a Cawl spoon if you've got no ladle. So these were carved by the same craftsman who made the spoons, and they also have their own sort of characteristic shape to them. So they would have, unlike a Scandinavian style ladle where the pot hook is at the base of the spoon, these ones have it at the end, because they would be hung up off like a string in the kitchen, and that was why they put the hook at the end like that. And you can see that, like I was talking about, they've got this parallel square handle so that they can chuck it up in a vise and work on the bowl. And they would have done that with an adze and a tuka cam. And almost everything about how these were carved is the same as the Cawl spoons, just on a bigger scale. And you can sort of see the stylistic similarities, although allowances have been made that one is a ladle and one is a spoon. So I just think that's interesting. On the right, we've got some pole lathe turned Cawl bowls. These would be sycamore bowls. These are the accompanying item for the Cawl spoon. You can't have the spoon without a bowl. And so they would have been almost as commonplace, but they don't seem to have survived in as great a number as the spoons have, for whatever reason. These are a bit more rare, the original pole lathe turned bowls, than the spoons are. And I think my theory on that is that it's easier to carve a spoon than it is to turn a bowl. And the bowls would have, once people stopped pole lathe turning, no more of these would have been being made, and they would have just slowly disappeared, apart from ones that have been saved for some reason or other. And that may not have been the case for spoons. They're sort of easier to keep your spoons in the cupboard and hang on to them. And on the left is some love spoons, which you may be familiar with. But what's interesting to me is that bottom love spoon has a bowl on it like a Cawl spoon, which I've never seen apart from this particular spoon. So I just think that's interesting that someone has carved a love spoon with a very functional looking bowl on it, which is the case for the oldest love spoons. They all have bowls on them that look like they might actually work for use as a spoon. Whereas as time goes on, the love spoons got more and more decorative and less resembling a spoon. So I just think that's interesting. And here is another style that I've found, which is Cawl spoons that have a carved bowl but a turned handle. And that's interesting. They seem to be a bit less common, but they definitely were made this way as well. And I don't know whether these would have been turned on the pole lathe. I assume so because of the uneven weight and the spinning around bowl part. But I think you could probably do it on a continuous motion lathe. I don't really know. I don't turn myself, so that's why I'm always curious to hear people's opinions on stuff.
If I had to guess, I would say these were, well, maybe they were pole lathes because like a spindle lathe.
Yeah.
The reason why I was going to guess not, because most of the pole lathe bowls that I've seen, they have like sets of grooves kind of going across them, whereas these are continuously smooth. But
Yeah.
I suppose they might, I don't know, did they use sandpaper back then? Did they sand, or was everything knife finished?
I believe that everything was knife finished. There's no mention of sandpaper in the sources, or but it may be that some of the more modern craftsmen would have started using sandpaper just because that was the tools of the time. But the era that I'm talking about in the 19th century, I be very similar to Welsh vernacular furniture, where only hand tools were used, and it was a very pragmatic style of working with wood, where you only finish the surfaces that are going to be seen. You leave the rough sawn marks on the bottom. You don't waste time doing stuff that your customer doesn't care about. You know, it's a similar kind of ethos. And that was it for my slides. And I hope you all got something out of that. I would love to hear your opinions.
That was excellent. That was wonderful, Julian. Thank you so much. What we have to figure out is how we can make that slide show the power. I'm assuming it's PowerPoint or some other similar. How we can make that file available to everybody. I'm not sure how we would go about doing that. Either that, or maybe people DM you. Do you mind emailing? Can it be emailed as an attachment?
What I'm going to do is I'm going to host it on my OneDrive for you to all download.
Awesome.
And for everyone who's in this call right now, that will be fine. If like 100 people decide to download it after the fact, then that might be an issue, because sometimes they only let a certain number of people have the file. But I'm going to do that now, so you can all get a hold on it if you want to have a look at it.
Cool. You'll pop the link into the chat.
Julian, you can turn these spoons. You see that one? That was done just a wee while ago, and that's done in a modern lathe.
Yeah.
So it's a circular bit, so it turns no problem, and then it's not finished yet, obviously, but it's a turned handle.
Yeah.
With a thistle at the end and the rest still to be. So you can turn it easily in a complete circle lathe, not necessarily a pole lathe.
I've accidentally just messaged someone in particular that here is the one for everyone. So yeah, if you follow that link, you should be able to download my PowerPoint. Let me know if that works.
Awesome. Yep, I'm opening it now.
And there is a lot of information that I didn't include that you may want to read from the sources that I used. I don't know if you can get them in your local library or anything like that. One of the books that I relied on for this research was one that my university actually had to purchase so that I could look at it, because that you couldn't get it at the library. So you run into problems like that when you want to research such a niche topic.
Yeah.
Could I ask this question, Julian?
Yeah, absolutely. But just before you go, Ian, it doesn't have to be about. If you want to ask me about Cawl spoons in general, or about your Cawl spoon or anything like that, I'm going to be here for the next little while, so you can fire away.
It's really what I can't, because I've made 3. I'm in the process of making 3. But I still can't understand why they picked that shape, because it's quite specific for drinking your soup from the side.
Yeah.
I can't understand why they just didn't. I mean, they were almost there, you know. I mean, they could have stuck the handle there, and we would have had a normal spoon. Is there any evidence on why they picked that shape?
I don't know. I don't know. I was chatting with Jeff Hannes about this question. We were talking about where does this shape come from? And his theory is that, and this is something that comes from Mike Abbott's Green Woodworking book, and he gives this idea that they would have actually pole lathe turned the billet for the spoon, and then they would have split multiple spoons out of the billet and carved the inside of the bowl, and that way you save a bunch of work because you can turn the outside profile of like 2 or 3 spoons at once from the same branch, and then just split it down the pith to get your spoons out.
2 spoons,
So he reckons that is where the shape of the spoons comes from, and that it's tied to the method of production. And I think that is an interesting idea and makes a lot of sense, but it's not something that I've been able to find any historical information to support.
But again, as a pulley, for me to turn a billet this thick, to get that size of bowl, I'm wasting a hell of a lot of wood. Whereas if I turned it that way, already my bowl's a lot narrower, so I could potentially get more spoons out of a billet.
Yeah, I think the answer is that they just liked it that way. If you like, I don't know if you saw some of the antique spoons that I was just showing in the previous few slides.
Yes, that was interesting,
The bowl is either oval or it's approximately round, but I've never ever seen a normal spoon-shaped bowl one.
I'm trying that, slightly off center, just for a laugh.
That looks good.
I'm going to use it. I'm going to finish it and use.
They also had. Let's not forget the Cawl spoon is not the only spoon that existed in Wales. It's just the one that I like.
Well, again, that's why I asked the question. I mean, surely they would have seen other shaped spoons, which I would imagine would be more useful for eating a wider variety of food.
That's like if you look at the love spoons, they have like a more traditional bowl type shape. Yeah.
But they also had like just normal eating like Georgian spoons and dolphin spoons were just normal eating spoons. But interestingly, in the past, they more often than not would have used buffalo horn or some other kind of horn for those kinds of spoons, for small eating spoons.
All right, okay. Yeah, that's true. I've seen that,
and those were made in a very interesting way that is not at all related to.
I think there are quite equivalents to the ramen soup spoon, so which is also nearly roundish or even oval in that size. And I think that has something to do with the crank, because I think because the bowls you're eating that is are quite deep, so the crank is totally unpractical to eat like we do, like that. So you're really dipping up from the side, and then the handle is in your way. I tried a few times to eat a ramen soup with these little round scoops they normally have in the restaurants, and it's really not practical. So I think it has something, and that's why this oval shape appears to me like more practical than a round shape.
Although with a ramen, you're dealing with a noodle, so part of the size, right, and part of the shape is to get under and pull up a load of noodles. Cawl's
you don't eat the noodles with the spoon. You eat them with the sticks, with the chopsticks.
Yeah.
Sorry, I interrupt
at the same time.
So I think you don't eat the noodles with a spoon. And what did you want to say?
I was saying the same thing. I was saying you eat the noodles with chopsticks and you slurp.
Yeah, that's true.
So you've got 2 parallel implements going on. Whereas for a lot of meals when I eat, I'll have my Cawl spoon and I'll also have a fork for the bits. You know, like if I want to stab a potato, I'll use a fork. I'm not going to sort of fish around in my soup for a potato with my spoon. I'll just.
Well, this is where Ron would make the argument for the Welsh Cawl spork.
Wonder if the shape of the bowl was actually related to how poor the people were, because I know in Inuit tradition they made like a big scoop and it was about yay long, the bowl, and it went up like that, and they used that, and they had a bit, and then they passed it to someone else.
Well, the kind of situation that these cow spoons evolved from is that before the 19th century, when more people started to have furniture in their homes, not everyone had a table and chairs. So they would eat around the hearth from a single pot. And then it starts to make sense why these spoons were so widespread. If you've got a big pot of soup in the middle of the room around the hearth, and everyone has their own spoon and their own bowl, and you don't have any other cutlery and you don't have a table, then that begins to explain why you get a specialized implement.
I wonder also, Julian, if the bowl shape was influenced by the Twicca cam.
It's
with
quite possible,
the
yes.
circular
Yeah.
cutting surface, you can only make so many bowl shapes, right?
So if you've ever tried to carve a cow spoon and you are lucky enough to own a Twicca cam, you will find that it is the perfect tool for the job.
Right. It is. Yep.
And that's no coincidence. It's because this is the tool that they use to make the spoons. And I think Wade is onto a very good point there, is that the tools inform the work. So if this is the knife that you've got, then you're going to make something that looks like a cow spoon. If you're trying to make, like you're not going to try and make an artfully egg-shaped bowl with a round knife. It just doesn't work that well.
But you can make that oblong shape just as easily as round.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially if
I found it perfect. Like the first one that I carved, and I'd never tried carving one before. I'm still in the process because I cut my fingers, so I've been taking a break from carving to let it heal. But that Twicca cam, I mean, it cut right through it, and mine was relatively hard maple, and it was perfect for that shape. Absolutely perfect. I got probably one of the smoothest finishes on a bowl that I've ever gotten because it was the design fits the tool perfectly.
Mm-hmm. And that's something I designed that with my knife in mind, right?
Yeah. Well, are you using the 50 or the 65?
The 50.
Yeah, that's what I was using.
Yeah, so if you carve a spoon using the same exact knife I was using, natural that when you carve my design, you're going to realize that spoon is well suited to the tool that I happen to have. Yeah, and I think that would also be the case in the past.
Yep.
That's what I also discovered. It's just a few cuts to hollow the bowl, even the oval.
The bowl is bigger in terms of volume. It's simpler to make, and that's why I think a lot of the design elements of cow spoons are things that make the cow spoon easier and more efficient to carve for batch production.
Yep.
It's like the handle design, the bowl design, the fact that they all have, for the most part, they all have stopped cuts at the corners of the bowl means you can just split away that waste.
Yep.
Because the Welsh spoon carvers would have been carving with clear straight grain sycamore, so they could just split straight down to the line. They don't have to waste any time axing out the sides of the spoon. And there are multiple things like that, like the back of the handle, just a couple of swipes with the axe will clear that out. The only thing in my design that is time consuming and fiddly is the curve in the handle, which is not necessary.
Yeah.
And that only exists in a few historical examples of like really nice spoons that I've found. And those ones were more likely to have been carved by enthusiastic amateurs such as ourselves.
Yeah, you can totally see that the basic design, even the like that swoop coming down into the at the neck, where it almost looks similar to Sean Miller's sort of, stuff where it's very angular. You got your handle coming down, and then it's an angular down, and then the ball. They're very straight, easy to do cuts. I could even see them like being done a lot with draw knives.
Because they never use draw knives. They never use shave horses.
Which shocks me. Yeah. Because it seems like it's like well suited to it, or even like I haven't taken mine to the spoon mule yet, but I would think it like would be a very quick, process of banging those out on a spoon mule.
There's just no evidence that they ever had those tools.
Yeah,
they had the spring pole lathe, and that's it.
Interesting. Or a great lathe like the one in that one photo.
But they would axe their billets for the lathe. They wouldn't shave them.
Yeah. Well, that probably is a good point then. They could probably get like pretty much very close to finished form just with the axe, to tell you the truth, other than the hollowing, and the rounding over the bowl. Let's
go back and look at one of these photos. I'll just pull it up in full screen and share my screen. But sorry, bear with me. This photo of the spoon carver in his workshop, because we can actually have a closer look at his spoons.
You're not sharing it yet. Okay.
Can you see it now?
Yeah. No. Coming up. Yep.
Let's have a look at his axed out blanks. You can see what he's done. He's just chopped off the handle. He's roughly carved the back of the bowl. He hasn't hollowed them out yet. And you can see sort of the extra depth in these spoons compared to the ones that I make.
Mm.
And if I look closely, it looks like he's carving a normal spoon. That doesn't appear to be a Cal spoon.
It does,
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So there you go, Ian.
He's probably been asked by someone.
Yeah.
Just do me a normal spoon, please.
It's too bad that this photo wasn't taken just a few seconds later when he was cutting the tines into the spork.
Yeah.
It bears to remember that in the past, photos were not a snapshot of time.
Yeah.
They were. So this would have been carefully staged, and he would have sat down, and someone would have been photographing him at work. It's not like a slice of life. It's more. You've got to remember that that photographs were this sort of formal thing.
Anyway, Julian, can you show a little more about how the handle meets the bowl, especially on the back? I haven't seen that in your videos particularly well.
Sure. I'll show you on a few spoons. I've got a few Cal spoons on me.
You sort of see the top where the bowl meets the downward sweep of the handle, but not so much on the back of the bowl.
Yeah, I saw your comment about that, and I just didn't get around to it. Sorry.
The other thing that I take away from that photograph is that I need to dress far more, nicely. I need to get myself a nice tweed vest like that.
Yeah. Well, that's connected to what I just said about like he'd be wearing his nicest workshop clothes.
Right.
Not going to find him there in a daggy t-shirt to get his photo taken.
Yep.
So here there's a familiar clatter for anyone who knows.
Some broken spoons.
No. So here is the spoon template spoon, right? And on the back, here is the side view, which you've all seen. And on the back, there's nothing of note. It just a smooth transition from the bowl into the hand.
I got you.
I just completely round over the back of the bowl, apart from these sections here, which I leave a little bit thicker, as you can see. So there's a sort of thickness taper from the thin parts where you eat from, and then it gets thicker and thicker and thicker from the middle towards the back. I don't scoop out these parts like some people do. I just like to do an even taper on my cowl spoons. On some
And you've got you've rounded over the hump. I've been leaving that as a peak, but that's.
But that's an aesthetic choice. So do what you like. Here is the spoon that I carved during my previous demonstration. I finished it since then. So it's the same kind of shape. I made it a little bit bigger. It turned out a little bit bigger. Not sure why, but that sometimes happens. I think the reason was because I drew it a little bit bigger than I needed, because I was trying to make the point that you always draw your spoon a little bit bigger than you need. But then I didn't need to make it any bigger because I carved it precisely to how I drew it. And on this one, the hump is even more exaggerated, but I have still rounded it off. I'm not a huge fan of this spoon. It's a bit too big for my mouth, but there's probably someone out there with an even bigger mouth than me. I've yet to meet. And here's two more I'm going to show you. This one is probably my favorite out of cowl spoons. If any one of you have seen my spoon crank page, this is the cowl spoon template that you can get on the spoon crank. If you know about that, that's this spoon. And this is a similar spoon to the Rise Up and Carve spoon, but it's just a little bit daintier, a little bit more delicate, if that appeals to you. And this is carved out of a bit of plum wood.
Beautiful.
And the curve on the handle is much less pronounced.
So do you eat from the side with these, or do you eat from the front?
I eat with these sort of diagonally from the side.
Okay.
So like this. Okay. And I've got this bowl shape, so the whole bowl will fit in my mouth when I do that. So it's not too deep and it's not too big. And that's how I make them for myself. But that is not how they were made historically. Historically, they were much deeper and bigger than that, and they must have just dripped it down their chin.
Well, that's what I did when I first tested it.
Yeah.
Well, I gotta say, I mean, reading that historical account on your one slide, when I drink soup or stew, or what you would think of as cowl, it's thick, it's chunky, there's lots of veg, lots of meat, lots of stuff, and some broth. Sounds to me like theirs was a much thinner soup. Yeah. And, so it's much more of a sipping, broth spoon than a chunky stew spoon, in my opinion.
Like, that's why when you think about the past, you've got to imagine, take off your rosy glasses and realize that it sucked.
Yeah.
For the majority of people, the past was horrible. There was hunger, there was drought, there was a lot of death. Way the 19th century had horrible infant mortality, and just the general life expectancy was low. You'd be lucky to live to 30. Like you're gonna turn 15. You're gonna go to work in the mines. It's not even an exaggeration. It's just how it was. So it sort of paints a picture.
Yeah, the episode, I don't know if anybody here watches The Crown, and I know it's not a historically necessarily, accurate representation, but there was a particularly good, episode where they're showing, a mining disaster in Wales while the Prince of Wales was there, visiting.
Would that have been Aberfan?
I don't remember.
Yeah, probably that, like he's 16.
Yeah, it was the Aberfan thing.
Yeah.
Sort of.
It was a very moving episode. It was really good.
Maybe 10 miles from away from where we are now.
Yeah.
And Julian just said, at 15 or 16 they'd go down to the mines, but it was when you were like 7 or 8, they basically in the mines there are these big doors to control the airflow, and the little kids from 7 or 8 years old, that would be their job, just opening and closing the doors as the horses and people moved through. And they said because of drafts and stuff, they'd be given a little candle, but oftentimes it would blow out within a little, the first time the door was open, the draft would blow that out, and so they'd spend most of their day in the dark, down in the mines, just opening and closing doors.
Wow.
From the age of 7 or 8. So
where we live, Nell, and myself, it's the Rhondda Valley, and it's the sort of center of the mining industry. The population went from several hundred up to, I think it was 150,000 within a few years. It was,
wow.
Yeah, it was really, it's what kept the Royal Navy afloat, basically, the steam coal. You know, it was a different world. I can still remember the old coal tips. When I was a youngster, I'm 52 now. But I can still remember those scars on the mountains, you know. But
yeah.
It was a very farm-based area before. So these, the cow spoons would have been something they would have been making here locally.
Yeah, so that's something that happened in the 19th century, is the transformation of the landscape from agriculture into industry. That transformation sort of parallels the decline in traditional crafts, because the traditional crafts were very tied to agriculture.
My father's side of the family, we've always worked in wood. My father was a carpenter, and you're saying about wearing a tweed waistcoat. I've got photographs of him when he came back from war. That he's wearing his beret, and he's got his rags virtually, his work clothes, but he's got a tie on. You know, they would wear a tie to work. You know. The family moved down from Mid Wales, from an agricultural area, Llanidloes, Cwmbellan, just outside Llanidloes, and to the Rhondda, to the valley just across from the Rhondda, all for the mines. That's how it was. A lot of the country people moved to the valleys then. It was black gold essentially. You won't get us Meredith down a mine though.
That was good.
All right. Did anybody have any other questions or any things that they wanted to discuss while we have Julian here? While I'm recording? If not, then I'm going to stop the recording, and then obviously folks are free to, hang out and carry on if you wish. But if there's nothing else on topic. All right, then I'm going to say thank you very much, Julian. This was excellent. Thank you very much for sharing your file with us and for your knowledge and your time. Really well done. This was absolutely fascinating. And I'm sure other questions will crop up. Julian's out there, Little Bear Sloyd. Make sure you DM him your questions. I'm sure he will be happy to answer. So thank you all. And I'm going to stop recording now. And that's it.
Yeah.
All right.